When the fire began, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, a United Press reporter happened to be walking by Washington Square. He saw the fire, and he immediately got to a telephone and phoned in this report. I was walking through Washington Square when a puff of smoke issuing from the factory building caught my eye. I reached the building before the alarm was turned in. I saw every feature of the tragedy visible from outside the building. I learned a new sound, a more horrible sound than description can picture. It was the thud of a speeding, living body on a stone sidewalk. Thud, dead, thud, dead, thud, dead. 62 thud deads. I call them that because the sound and the thought of death came to me each time at the same instant. There was plenty of chance to watch them as they came down. The height was 80 feet. I watched one girl falling, waving her arms, trying to keep her body upright until the very instant she struck the sidewalk. She was trying to balance herself. Then came the thud. Then a silent, unmoving pile of clothing and twisted, broken limbs. "Call the firemen," they screamed, scores of them. "Get a ladder," cried others. They were all as alive and whole and sound as we were who stood on the sidewalk. Sirens sounded from several directions. "Here they come," we yelled. "Don't jump. Stay there." One girl climbed onto the window sash. Those behind her tried to hold her back. Then she dropped into space. Then came that thud. I looked up. Another girl was climbing onto the windowsill. Others were crowding behind her. She dropped. I watched her fall, and again the dreadful sound. 2 windows away, 2 girls were climbing onto the sill. They were fighting each other and crowding for air. Behind them, I saw many screaming heads. They fell almost together, but I heard 2 distinct thuds. Then the flames burst out through the windows on the floor below them and curled up into their faces. The firemen began to raise a ladder. Others took out a life net. While they were rushing to the sidewalk with it, 2 more girls shot down. The firemen held it under them. The bodies broke through it. The grotesque simile of a dog jumping through a hoop struck me. Before they could move the net, another girl's body flashed through it. The thuds were just as loud. It seemed as if there had been no net there. It seemed to me that the thuds were so loud that they might have been heard all over the city. As I looked up, I saw a love affair in the midst of all the horror. A young man helped a girl to the windowsill. Those of us who were looking saw her put her arms about him and kiss him. Then he held her out into space and dropped her. But quick as a flash, he was on the windowsill himself. His coat fluttered upward. The air filled his trouser legs. I could see that he wore tan shoes and hose. His hat remained on his head. Thud, dead. Thud, dead. Together they went into eternity. I saw his face before they covered it. You could see in it that he was a real man. He had done his best. We found out later that in the room in which he stood, many girls were being burned to death by the flames and were screaming in an inferno of flame and heat. He chose the easiest way and was brave enough to even help the girl he loved to a quicker death after she had given him a goodbye kiss. Firemen raised the longest ladder. It reached only to the 6th floor. I saw the last girl jump at it and miss it. And then the faces disappeared from the window, but now the crowd was enormous, though. All this had occurred in less than 7 minutes. The start of the fire and the thuds and the deaths. I heard screams around the corner and hurried there. What I'd seen before was not so terrible as what followed. Up in the 9th floor, girls were burning to death before our very eyes. They were jammed in the windows. No one was lucky enough to be able to jump, it seemed. I looked upon the heap of dead bodies, and I remembered these girls were the shirtwaist makers. I remembered their great strike of last year in which these same girls had demanded more sanitary conditions and more safety precautions in the shops. These dead bodies were the answer.